Hey guys, tonight we slide into the sticky, shimmering heat of ancient Olympus, where clouds don't just drift, they gossip, brood, and occasionally explode into divine hissy fits. Picture it. The sky smells like lightning and old grudges. The marble halls of the gods echo with footsteps too dramatic for their own good. And Zeus, yes, that Zeus is once again making a terrible decision involving a mortal woman and absolutely no foresight. You're watching from the edge of a celestial courtyard, nibbling on a fig you didn't pay for, while across the clouds, a young nymph named Io is laughing a little too loudly at Zeus's terrible jokes. She doesn't know yet that her life is about to get deeply bovine, but you can already feel the tension prickle like static in the air. You probably won't survive this, but hey, at least the gods are entertaining. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments too. Let's see who else is listening from their cozy corner of the universe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Zeus isn't even trying to hide it. You can tell from the way he leans in, like the worst kind of uncle at a wedding reception. Io, for her part, is doing what many mortals before her have done, trying to laugh her way out of divine danger. It never works. The other gods are pretending not to watch, but they're totally watching. Hera especially. Oh, Hera sees everything. She's not storming in just yet, but the way she stands still is louder than thunder. Now, it's important to understand that Hera isn't the jealous psycho the myths often make her out to be. She's more like a middle manager in an endless family business she never asked to join. But also, she's absolutely going to wreck someone's life over this. You blink, and suddenly the courtyard's filled with a weird kind of quiet. The air shifts, and everyone finds something else to look at, except you. Because you know this silence is where the fun begins. In Olympus, this is the sound right before a divine incident report gets filed. Zeus panics. Not like a normal mortal panic, but that special immortal flavor of bad decision energy. He mutters something about needing to protect Io from Hera's wrath, and like any man trying to cover up his own mess, he makes it exponentially worse. With a snap of his fingers and zero input from Io herself, she's transformed. Not into something poetic or symbolic. Not into a tree or a cloud or a constellation. No, Zeus turns her into a cow. A full four-legged, grazing, mooing cow. Like it's a reasonable thing to do. Like it's step one in his hide the girlfriend playbook. Now, here's a fun mainstream fact. Turning people into animals was sort of Zeus's thing. He once turned himself into a swan to seduce Leda, a bull to carry off Europa, and an eagle because ... Well, why not? Fringe tidbit? The Greeks actually had a word for this casual god-to-animal power move, metamorphosis. It wasn't just for show, it reflected the belief that divine boundaries were fluid, which is both poetic and a massive HR problem. Back to you watching Io adjust to her new cow body. There's a moment where you swear her eyes are still human, wide with confusion and what the actual hell panic. She tries to speak, but it comes out as a guttural moo, which would be funny if it weren't tragic. Historians still argue whether this moment was seen by ancient audiences as comic relief or a sobering commentary on female autonomy in myth. Either way, she's stuck chewing grass now. Zeus, ever the hero in his own mind, pats the cow awkwardly and says something about keeping her safe from Hera. It's not clear if he genuinely believes this, or if he's just hoping the situation will unmoo itself somehow. You watch him disappear in a thundercloud, leaving Io behind like a very weird, very sacred lawn ornament. You try to imagine what it's like to be her. To go from a carefree nymph to literal livestock because some thunder god couldn't keep his toga on. The grass isn't even good. It's dry and a little crunchy, and there are bugs everywhere. You swat at a fly with your tail, a tail you didn't have this morning, and feel the cold metal of a divine chain settle around your neck. Hera has arrived. She doesn't scream, doesn't rage. She just stands there, looking at the cow with eyes that say, "I know exactly what this is." Then, with the calm efficiency of someone who's been through this too many times, she gestures, and suddenly Io has a babysitter. Not just any babysitter, Argus Panoptza. His name means all-seeing, and it's not metaphorical. He has 100 eyes, not scattered all over like a cartoon monster, but artfully placed eyelids on elbows, pupils on calves, peepers peeking from knuckles. It's grotesque and weirdly elegant, like a surveillance-themed fashion show gone wrong. Argus doesn't speak. He just watches, always. Some of his eyes nap while the others stay open, which means poor Io never has a moment to herself. You'd think being a cow was bad enough, but now she can't even moo in peace. Her life is reduced to grazing under supervision, being the world's most tragic pet. And all around, the gods carry on, pretending it's not weird that one of their own is watching livestock with the focus of a CIA analyst on double espresso. You can't help but wonder, was Hera doing this out of cruelty? Or was it her way of saying, "I see you, Zeus, and I'm not playing your games anymore"? Scholars still debate whether Hera's punishment was aimed at Io, or if the real target was the thunder god himself watching his latest disaster unfold from Olympus with the worst kind of helpless guilt. But for now, you're here with Io, under Argus's endless gaze. The sun is hot, the grass is dull, and the only soundtrack is the occasional rustle of wings as a bored god flies by pretending not to care. And you lie down beside her, feeling the hum of ancient tension under your skin and wondering how in Olympus this mess is going to get worse. Spoiler, it absolutely will. So there you are, lying in a dusty field beside a confused nymph-turned-cow. And Argus, your 100-eyed chaperone, is just blinking in stereo from every angle. You wonder how someone like him even gets hired. Is there an application process? Does he submit a resume with extensive eyelid coverage under special skills? Either way, Hera couldn't have picked a more passive-aggressive punishment if she tried. Instead of throwing lightning bolts or yelling in the celestial group chat, she assigns Io a babysitter with enough visual coverage to make a drone feel underqualified. Every time Io tries to sneak off, chew something symbolic, or even scratch her side on a rock, those eyes catch her. It's like being on a reality show where the only rule is, don't stop suffering. Zeus, meanwhile, is nowhere to be found. Which is classic Zeus. Start the fire, ghost the cleanup. From what you can tell, he's sitting on some cloud pretending he didn't just co-IFE a woman to cover his tracks. But Hera? She's not pretending. Hera's doing what any longtime spouse of an eternal philanderer might do, channeling white-hot rage into extremely creative pettiness, and it's working. Every blink from Argus is a reminder to Io and to Zeus that Hera doesn't need brute force when she has endurance, precision, and an army of very judgmental eyeballs. You wonder if this is how ancient gods do therapy. The thing is, Argus wasn't just a creepy watchdog. According to one of the more fringe details of the myth, the Greeks believed Argus was always a little not quite mortal. Some say he was born with all those eyes. Others argue he earned them by doing deeds that required constant vigilance, like slaying monsters or babysitting problematic gods. Historians still argue whether Argus represents surveillance, justice, or just good old-fashioned mythological overkill. But in this story, he's a tool of spite, polished to a divine sheen, and he never sleeps, not fully. He dozes with a third of his eyes, naps with another third, and scans the horizon with the rest. You try to sneak behind him just to test it. Blink. One of his shoulder eyes follows you like a cat clock. You freeze. He raises a brow from his elbow. You back away slowly and reconsider your life choices. Io, for her part, is handling this about as well as anyone could handle being turned into livestock and stalked by a hundred-eyed fashion disaster. At first, she tries to communicate scratching letters in the dirt with her hooves, mooing in different tones like a bovine Morse code, but it's no use. Every attempt to reclaim her voice, her identity, gets swallowed by the silence of divine disinterest. It's like yelling into a cloud. She moos, Argus stares, and somewhere in Olympus, Zeus probably pats himself on the back for keeping her safe. You want to throw a thunderbolt at his head. You'd probably miss, but still. And then one morning, as dew clings to the grass and Argus watches Io chew with his usual surveillance intensity, something changes. The air smells different, less divine, more mischievous. You feel a breeze. That doesn't belong to the season. You look up. Hermes, the god's favorite mailman, trickster, and unlicensed therapist, has arrived. He doesn't walk, he glides, sneakers barely brushing the earth. He's humming something jazzy and probably copyrighted, and in his hand is a reed flute, carved with symbols that pulse faintly in the morning light. He's not here for a battle. He's here for a vibe shift. Hermes doesn't speak at first. He just stands near Argus, playing his flute like a busker who knows you can't look away. The melody is light, winding, the kind that makes your eyelids heavy even if you weren't already bored out of your skull watching cow drama. Argus raises an eyebrow from his shoulder. Hermes raises both his very normal, mortal-numbered eyes in return. Then he plays again, softer now, and even you feel your limbs soften like overcooked barley. It's a lullaby with teeth. One by one, the 100 eyes begin to blink slower. Some close fully. Others flutter like curtains in a sleepy breeze. You can't help but be impressed. This isn't a fight. It's an art installation titled Murder, but make it gentle. Mainstream fact time. Hermes was known as the god of transitions, travel, and clever speech. He was also kind of the fixer. For Olympus, whenever a god needed something shady done with plausible deniability, Hermes was the guy. Fringe trivia? Some ancient texts suggest Hermes invented not just the flute, but the very concept of boredom as a weapon. Not officially, of course, but the idea that sound could unravel vigilance. That was peak Hermes energy. You watch Argus sway, his upper eyes now drooping like melting candles. Hermes lowers the flute. There's a pause, the kind that hangs heavy in myth before something irreversible happens. Then, with one smooth motion, Hermes draws his blade, not flashy, not glowing, just efficient, and slashes. Argus collapses like a marionette with all the strings cut at once. No cry, no thunderclap. Just silence, profound and unsettling. His eyes close, all of them, and Io's chain slips free like the plot armor just disengaged. It's over. Except, it's not. Hera, upon hearing of Argus's gentle demise, does not scream. She does not throw things. She takes Argus's eyes, yes, all of them, and places them on her favorite bird, the peacock. That's why, to this day, peacocks have those haunting eyes on their feathers. Historians still argue whether this was a tribute to loyalty, a warning to traitors, or Hera's way of making passive aggression a fashion statement. You think it's probably all three. Io, now free, doesn't celebrate. There's no dramatic moo of liberation. She looks at the field where Argus fell, and then at Hermes, who's already dusting off his tunic and whistling a new tune. She doesn't thank him. Maybe she can't. Maybe the part of her that was before Zeus, before cowhood, before babysitter death lullabies, has gone somewhere too quiet to return from. You walk beside her, unsure whether to offer comfort or grass. She doesn't want either. What she wants is to be human again, and that's not something Hermes can flute back into place. The gods are done with this story for now. Hera has her peacock. Zeus is pretending none of this was his idea. Hermes vanishes with a wink and a trail of sandals that smell faintly of rosemary. And Io? She's still a cow. Free, but still transformed. And freedom, when you're not yourself, is a bittersweet thing. You lie down next to her under the sky that seems too wide for comfort. Somewhere, a bird cries. The wind carries whispers, in a language you almost understand. And Io, poor Io, watches the horizon as if it might finally give her back her name. You're starting to get used to the sound of hooves squishing through soft dirt, the low hum of a traumatized moo drifting on the breeze, and the overwhelming feeling that no one in Olympus is ever going to be held accountable for anything. Io, still very much a cow, is wandering now free from her 100-eyed prison guard, but still wrapped in the silk of divine consequences. She doesn't know where to go. You don't either. But walking feels better than standing still. So you follow her, step by uneven step, across a landscape that feels like it belongs in a fever dream, sponsored by ancient trauma and atmospheric dust. There's no map, no divine GPS, just endless terrain and the knowledge that Hera still isn't done. You see, Hera's not the kind of goddess who lets go after one symbolic gesture. She doesn't just slap eyeballs on a bird and call it closure. No, Hera prefers the long game, the kind that unfolds over time and distance, like a slow burn revenge novel with zero redemption arc. And her next move? Oh, it buzzes. It stings. It hovers just behind Io's twitching ears. A gadfly. Not just any fly, this one's got divine programming, and the kind of aggressive persistence that could make even the chillest cow consider full existential collapse. Ancient sources say it was sent by Hera personally, a winged embodiment of rage and mosquito tear spite. The fly doesn't rest. It hovers, nips, bites, never giving Io a second of peace. You try swatting at it, but it just dodges with the smug confidence of a creature literally crafted by a goddess in a bad mood. And so begins what you'd later call the Gadfly Chronicles, a tragicomic montage of Io trying to escape this bitey drone of doom. She runs, she gallops, she bucks and twists and tries hiding under trees, in rivers, behind rocks, but the fly follows, relentless. Every moment of stillness becomes a new opportunity for irritation. It's like Hera's saying, "Oh, you thought losing your body and your voice was bad? Try being nibbled into madness." Here's your mainstream myth fact. The gadfly was one of the key symbols in Io's journey, representing divine punishment that couldn't be shaken. It was a physical metaphor, if you will, for trauma on loop. Fringe tidbit. Some scholars believe the fly might have been inspired by real-world cattle pests in Greece, small, aggressive insects that tormented livestock and even spread disease. If so, that means Hera weaponized actual biological misery into a personalized revenge strategy. Historians still argue whether the fly was meant to represent guilt, retribution, or just Hera being incredibly extra. You and Io run, across dusty plains, through groves that whisper old songs of dryad gossip, past villages where farmers pause mid-bread baking to say, "Is that a cow sprinting like it's haunted?" Yes, yes it is. And you're with her, always a few steps behind, swatting at the air like you're losing a slap fight with invisible hands. It's not graceful, it's not heroic, but it's honest. Because let's be real, if your life had imploded into a divine cow fugitive melodrama, you'd be flailing too. One evening, as the sun bruises the sky with purple and gold, you find yourselves near a cliff overlooking the sea. Io stops, breathing hard, flanks heaving. The gadfly buzzes near her eye, and for a moment, you see something crack inside her. Not fear, not pain. Something older like grief that's finally stopped pretending to be strength. She steps toward the edge. Just a little. You move closer gently. You're not sure what to say to a girl who's been stripped of her name, her body, and her peace. But you hum, a low, quiet sound, not a song, just a tone. It helps a little. She steps back. The next day, you cross into new land. Mountains loom in the distance, their spines like sleeping dragons under moss. Locals start whispering about the sacred cow, Sambo. Some leave offerings, figs, barley, a weirdly detailed clay model of a calf. Io doesn't understand it. Neither do you, but word has spread. The cow who cries like a woman. The beast who never rests. Somewhere along the way, her suffering turned mythic. People don't just see an animal anymore, they see a story. And once that happens, good luck returning to normal. You're not just a girl anymore. You're a symbol. One town carves her likeness into a shrine. Another builds a little altar beside a well. People start leaving notes scratched on bark, pressed into wax, murmured into the earth. Prayers. Please, help me find peace like the sacred one. You want to shake them. Do they not see she's still suffering? That being famous doesn't heal you, but then again, maybe it's not about healing. Maybe it's about recognition. About the hope that if someone as cursed as Io can keep moving, maybe they can too. Still, fame doesn't pay the toll on your hooves. You and Io press on. West, always west. The gadfly still buzzes, but it's weaker now, like Hera's rage is losing its battery. And then finally, one morning, you find water, not a stream, not a puddle. A river so wide it stretches like an invitation across the world's belly. The Nile. You've crossed into Egypt. Everything smells different here. Papyrus, sun-scorched. Limestone, something floral but unplaceable. The air is thick, and your bones feel like they're floating. Egypt doesn't ask questions. Egypt looks at a cow that moves with sadness and says, "Yes, obviously this is a goddess." The priests come running. They bow low. They sprinkle herbs and chant in voices that sound older than any mountain you've passed. They name her Hathor, or Isis, or something close. It's unclear. Ancient timelines are messy, and identities tend to blur. But what's certain is this: they don't see a curse. They see power, dignity, a divine visitor who brings meaning simply by surviving. Io doesn't argue. Maybe she's too tired. Maybe she's learning to rest in what people need her to be. You sit beside her in a cool temple courtyard, the gadfly finally gone, and watch her close her eyes not in fear, but in peace. For the first time. Here's your scholarly wildcard. Historians still argue whether the myth of Io absorbing Egyptian goddess traits was a narrative convenience or a reflection of ancient cultural blending. Some say the Greeks, fascinated by Egypt, retrofitted myths to align with existing deities. Others claim Io's transformation into a goddess was the only way to dignify her journey. You think both can be true. You lie back in the shade. Io breathes. Softly beside you, somewhere, a priest is lighting incense. Somewhere else, a scroll is being written about the sacred cow who walked across the world. And you? You're just glad the buzzing stopped. Even if it's quiet in a way that feels a little like goodbye. It turns out Egypt has a different kind of divine etiquette. No screaming gods, no suspicious clouds, no sudden transformations. Just sun, stone, ceremony, and an uncanny ability to treat the inexplicable as if it were Tuesday. When Io stumbles into their world, dust-caked, fly-bitten, and more myth than mammal, the Egyptians don't panic, they kneel. You watch as high priests clad in linen approach her not with confusion, but reverence. Heads bowed low, arms extended like they've been expecting her since the pyramids were blueprints. They call her by names you don't understand. Some say she's the Earth Mother. Others call her the Eye of Ra, the embodiment of divine femininity, sorrow, and the cycles of the cosmos. Io just stands there, not mooing, not running, just breathing. Like someone who forgot they were allowed to. Here's the weird thing about the gods in Egypt. They aren't above becoming animals. Unlike the Greek deities who turn into birds, bulls, or swans to sneak around and seduce people, the Egyptian gods fully embrace their hybrid forms. They wear falcon heads, jackal ears, crocodile snouts like it's formal wear. So when they see a cow with the haunted eyes of a woman, they don't think, "Poor cursed girl." They think, Oh good, she's here. This shift is seismic. Io, who was a problem in Greece, a symbol of Zeus's indiscretions, Hera's fury and divine collateral damage, is here a solution. A prophecy fulfilled. A goddess in the making. Mainstream fact time. Many Egyptian goddesses, including Hathor and Isis, were linked to cows. Cows symbolized fertility, motherhood, and celestial. Nurturing, fringe detail. Some Egyptian temples had literal cow-shaped chambers where the sacred animal would rest, believed to connect the animal directly to the divine feminine energies of the universe. Historians still argue whether Io inspired these rituals, or if Greek writers simply retrofitted her story to align with Egyptian mythology for narrative convenience. Either way, your girl just got promoted. At first, Io seems confused by the worship. She's used to being chased, not cherished. She flinches when incense smoke wafts too close and steps back from flower garlands as if they might sting. But slowly, inch by careful inch, she adjusts. It starts when a young girl approaches her with a bowl of cool water. Io drinks, then eats a handful of dates laid out on a stone slab. No fly buzzes. No divine punishment comes crashing through the temple ceiling. For the first time in what feels like centuries, she's safe. And in that safety, she begins to transform, not physically, not yet, but emotionally. Her movements lose their twitchy urgency. Her eyes grow softer. She starts sleeping more, eating slower. She even lets a priestess paint her horns with gold leaf. You stay close, of course. Your own clothes are sun-bleached, your feet blistered, but nobody questions your presence. You're part of the myth now. The wanderer, the witness. Maybe they think you're a prophet, maybe just a really loyal sidekick, but they let you sit in the temple garden and feed Io pomegranate seeds without once asking your credentials. Honestly, it's kind of nice. The temple becomes a sanctuary. Not just for Io, but for the people who come to her. Women struggling with childbirth touch her flank and whisper prayers. Farmers ask for her blessing before planting. Children leave drawings of cows on papyrus, clumsy and sweet. Io doesn't speak still cursed with her four-legged form, but she listens. And in listening, she heals. Not just herself, but the community that has embraced her. You watch this unfold with a mix of awe and melancholy. Because you know this. Peace isn't permanent. Not in a story that started with gods and punishments. Zeus finally re-enters the chat. You see him first in a dream, his face carved into lightning. Eyes heavy with guilt, voice muffled by distance. When you wake, the sky over Egypt has turned slightly gray, like Olympus itself is trying to make a collect call. And then, there he is, descending like a weather system, wrapped in storms, smelling faintly of desperation and olive oil. He doesn't say Io's name at first, just stares at her. Maybe he's hoping she'll recognize him. Maybe he's just realizing how far she's come without him. She doesn't run, doesn't bow. She just looks at him with that same unblinking grace she learned from Argus, and waits. Zeus begins his apology the way powerful men often do, by explaining things nobody asked for. He says he did it to protect her, that he never wanted her to suffer, that Hera forced his hand. It's all very convenient. You stand off to the side, arms crossed, wondering if he even realizes how many steps he skipped between "I'm sorry" and "please be mine again." Io listens, tail swishing idly. He kneels, that part's new. He offers to undo the curse, to return her to her original form. Says he'll build her a temple, a constellation, a perfume line if she wants. But this time, he waits for an answer. Mainstream. Fact, Zeus rarely asked permission. Most of his romantic exploits were exercises in divine entitlement. But here, now, in the warmth of an Egyptian temple, even he understands that power alone doesn't make you right. Fringe detail? Some versions of the myth say that Io was pregnant during her time as a cow, that she carried Zeus's child across continents. Others omit this entirely, suggesting the story wasn't about maternity at all, but metamorphosis. Historians still argue whether Zeus's gift of returning Io to human form was meant as restitution or reclaiming. Io steps forward, slowly. Her hooves echo on the temple stones like thunder in slow motion. She touches her head to Zeus's chest, a gesture of acknowledgement, not forgiveness, not love, just recognition. Then light engulfs her, not the kind that burns, but the kind that restores. When it fades, she's standing there, human, naked, but draped in 1,000 layers of symbolism. She doesn't cover herself. She doesn't need to. Her body, once stolen by myth, now stands exactly as it is. Whole, changed, sacred. You hold your breath. Not because of the magic, because of her. Zeus smiles, relieved, like he just solved a puzzle he created. He reaches for her hand. She pulls it back, politely, firmly. Then she turns, walks past him, and returns to the temple. Not to him, not to Greece, but to herself. That night, the priests throw a celebration. Not for Zeus, for Io. They name her a goddess officially, elevate her as a divine protector of travelers, women, and those who've been wronged by power. You dance, awkwardly, joyfully. Someone hands you wine that tastes like crushed thyme and sunlight. Io dances too, in flowing linen, gold around her ankles. Her laughter a sound you never thought you'd hear again. And for a moment, just one, you forget she was ever a cow. You wake up with the taste of celebration still clinging to your tongue. Faint traces of honey and myrrh drying on your lips like whispers from the night before. The temple is quiet now, post-festival lull hanging in the air like the sigh after a storm. You stretch out under a canopy of palm fronds, listening to the distant rustle of linen robes and the soft chanting of morning priests, praising a goddess who used to moo. It was no longer in the garden where she fell asleep. You find her standing on the balcony overlooking the Nile, wrapped in a sheer cloth that catches the dawn light, her face calm, unreadable, like a statue sculpted in hope. You don't speak, neither does she. Some moments are too full to need words. She doesn't cry, doesn't laugh. Just watches the river wind past with eyes that have seen too many landscapes to be startled by another. You sit beside her and try to match her silence. After a while, she says something simple. It's still me, and you understand. That even if your body returns, the journey never really ends. You still carry the dust, the teeth marks, the stare of 100 eyes blinking. In shifts. The Nile might erase footprints, but it can't undo the walking. The temple has started to fill with worshippers again. Word spreading fast that the cow goddess is now visibly divine in the human sense. Tourists from across the Mediterranean basin are beginning to show up, wealthy Greeks, curious Libyans, a few Phoenicians who pretend to be here for trade but can't help staring at you with that awestruck look of someone seeing myth incarnate. You help set up offerings, arrange papyrus scrolls, explain in your best pidgin Greek Egyptian that yes, she did walk all the way here. Yes, that was a real gadfly, and no, she does not grant marriage advice. One guy asks if touching her will make him immortal. Io just raises an eyebrow and walks away. You love that for her. And yet, peace never really stays unbothered, does it? Because not long after the temple has settled into a routine of worship and pomegranate offerings, the scribes start asking questions. They want scrolls, they want poetry. They want origin stories with neat edges and dramatic arcs. Where did she come from? They ask you, what lessons does her journey teach? Was her suffering meant to test her purity or prove her divinity? You try not to roll your eyes. You say she was just trying to survive. They say, but what does that mean symbolically? You say she walked because she had to. They nod like you've handed them a mystery they can polish into philosophy. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Greeks and Egyptians often blended their mythologies, creating syncretic versions of gods to appease cultural tensions and boost political power. Fringe tidbit: some versions of the myth claim Io became not just a goddess, but an ancestor to future dynasties, including one that allegedly gave birth to the line of heroes that would eventually produce Hercules. Historians still argue whether this retroactive lineage was meant to legitimize certain rulers, or just patch a plot hole in the mythological family tree. And now, of course, Zeus is trying to get involved again. You hear about it before you see him. The sky gets a little moodier, birds start flying in weird spirals, and people start complaining about headaches and sudden urges to compose odes. He shows up 3 days later, hovering dramatically over the temple like a dad who heard someone else threw a better birthday party. He doesn't land right away, no. He waits until the courtyard is full of people, until the incense smoke is thick and the hymns are at their loudest. Then boom, thundercrack, flash of light, dramatic shimmer, and there he is. Beard immaculate, robes flowing, face arranged into what he probably thinks is a humble expression. He says he's come to pay his respects, that he wants to honor Io's transformation, which, let's be honest, sounds a lot like insert himself into a narrative he barely helped resolve. He gives her a golden staff, some stars in a box, and a very public apology that somehow still manages to center his feelings. Io listens, but you can see the corners of her mouth twitch like she's trying very hard not to laugh, or scream, or both. When he finishes, the temple crowd erupts in polite divine clapping, and Zeus looks pleased with himself. He offers to take her back to Olympus, to restore her to her rightful place among the gods. You nearly choke on a grape. Rightful? As if Olympus did anything but exile her into the wild with a divine insect chewing on her memories. Io, for her part, just steps forward and says, "I already found my place." It's not loud, it doesn't need to be. It cuts through the smoke like a clean blade. Zeus falters. Just a blink. Just enough for you to notice. Then he nods and says something vague about respecting her wishes and the wisdom of female agency, which, coming from him, feels like a wet napkin trying to be a manifesto. He leaves in a swirl of lightning that singes a few temple curtains and scares the local ibis population into a group panic. You help clean up the feathers. Io doesn't even flinch. Later, as you both sit watching the Nile again, she says something that sticks with you. He never asked if I wanted to be worshipped either. And it hits you, this whole journey, the divine drama, the suffering, the elevation. None of it ever paused to ask what she actually wanted. People gave her titles, forms, symbols, but no one just said, "Io, what do you need?" "So you do that," she thinks for a long moment, then says, "A bath, with rose oil, and no flies." You laugh. And then you fetch the rose oil. That night, the temple throws another celebration. Not for Zeus, not for any official pantheon-sanctioned purpose, but for Io, a living goddess whose mythology now includes joy, agency, and multiple floral-scented fruit baths. They light lanterns and float them on the river, each one carrying a prayer, a wish, or just a thank you. You release one too. Yours doesn't carry a name, just a single word, peace. And for the first time you feel it. Not just around you, but inside. You wake up to the sound of temple bells chiming softly in the wind, their rhythm steady and ancient, like the heartbeat of a civilization too old to bother explaining itself. It's been weeks since Zeus's very loud, very sparkly exit, and life has settled into a new kind of normal. Not quiet exactly. Gods rarely let anything stay quiet, but calmer. The priests now defer to Io not just as a goddess, but as an actual person. A woman with preferences. A woman who no longer pretends. Her trauma was just a stepping stone to glory. She's drawing boundaries now, and honestly, it's inspiring. Yesterday, she told a high priest to stop carving her face with eyelashes like eagle wings. "I don't look like that," she said flatly, sipping her date wine. "I look like me." The priest nodded so fast his head nearly detached, but underneath, the temple calm, something stirs. It's not Hera, not yet. But the gods don't exactly forget insults, and killing Argus wasn't a casual misdemeanor. Hermes may have played the lullaby, but everyone knows Io was the reason. Her presence in Egypt, her rising power, her refusal to stay a passive cow footnote. It's all a bit inconvenient. And for Hera, inconvenient usually turns into personal. You hear it first in murmurs, rumors of omens, shifting tides, priests. Waking up mid-dream muttering about the return of the fly. You want to roll your eyes, but you've learned to trust the background noise. When gods get petty, the world starts twitching at the edges. Io seems unbothered. Or maybe just too tired to care. She's sitting in the shade of the papyrus grove. Today, braiding her hair with strips of gold and humming a song you don't recognize. Her peace feels real, but you can't help scanning the horizon, because you know the story isn't finished. Not yet. And sure enough, one morning, the fly returns. It doesn't buzz. It purrs, like something upgraded, sleeker now, faster. The color of molten bronze and divine vengeance. It lands on the temple steps, tiny wings silent in the dawn, and then rises. Hovers, head straight for Io like it's drawn by an invisible string. She doesn't scream. She doesn't even flinch. She just says, "Really? Again?" And grabs the nearest fan like she's about to deal with this. Goddess-made pest like the world's most patient auntie at a summer picnic. You dive in beside her, swinging wildly at the fly with a palm frond, which probably looks less heroic, and more like interpretive dance. But here's the thing, it won't land. It circles, taunts, as if waiting for something. You catch a glint on its back and realize it's carrying a message. A single thread of gold, etched with Hera's sigil, looped delicately around the fly's thorax like a fashion statement, and a curse. You don't read it. You don't have to. The message is clear. I'm still watching. Mainstream fact? In myth, Hera is often portrayed as vengeful, especially toward Zeus's lovers or victims. But some interpretations see her not as cruel, but as symbolic. Of order, marriage, and consequence. The divine reaction to divine recklessness. Fringe tidbit? Some rare depictions of Hera suggest she had her own cultic following in Egypt, usually merged with local goddesses, which makes her grudge here not just personal, but political. Historians still argue whether Hera's actions in Io's myth were intended as warnings, justice, or just a god's version of spiraling. Io lets the fly buzz. She doesn't chase it this time. She watches it, lets it hover near her face, then simply says, "I'm not afraid of you." And in that moment, the fly pauses, wavers, then zips away into the sky like a glitch rejected from the narrative. You want to cheer, but Io just sighs and says, she sends something else, because of course she will. Hera doesn't like being ignored, and Io's power, gently claimed, quietly worn, is louder than any rebellion. She's living well. That's the one thing the gods hate more than betrayal. Indifference. That night, the temple holds a vigil. Not in fear, but in solidarity. The people stand with her now fully. They light bowls of scented oil, hum soft hymns, offer tokens carved from stone and bone, and pressed flowers. Io speaks to them, not with fire or prophecy, but with simple words. "I didn't choose the pain," she says. "But I chose what? To become after it." You feel your throat tighten. It's not just for them. It's for herself. Then the sky cracks. It's not a storm. It's a tear. A shimmer in the stars above the Nile, as if Olympus itself is drawing a curtain aside to peek through. And stepping out of that celestial doorway, in a robe of peacock feathers and expressions carved in marble, is Hera. She doesn't descend. She floats. Eyes sharp, lips tight, posture so upright it could puncture dimensions. The temple crowd drops. To its knees, you stay standing. Because Io does. They stare at each other across the courtyard, two forces finally confronting what's been boiling since that first laugh in Zeus's direction. Hera speaks first. Her voice is velvet over glass. You've become inconvenient. Io tilts her head. You've always been angry. Hera's brow twitches. Not enough to break her composure, but enough for you to see the storm under the skin. She says, you defied your place. Io replies, you wrote it for me without asking. They're not shouting. They're not trading spells. It's scarier than that. It's civil, terrifyingly civil. Hera says, you should thank me. If not for me, no one would know your name. Io smiles, small and devastating. And yet here I am, named by myself. The crowd doesn't breathe. Even the priests stop chanting. A beetle scuttles across the stone. You feel like it's about to be crushed by history. Mainstream myth logic says this is the part where the mortal is struck down, banished, or turned into something ironic. But instead, Hera does something strange. She blinks once, slowly. Then, she raises her hand and pulls something from the air. A pendant, shaped like a cow's eye. She holds it out. Take it, she says. A reminder. Io steps forward, takes it, not out of fear, but choice. She places it around her neck. Hera nods once, then she vanishes. No flash, no thunder. Just gone, like a chapter ending mid-sentence. The silence afterwards is crushing. Then slowly the people rise, one by one. A priest begins to sing, soft and unsure. Others join. You find yourself humming too. Io stands with the pendant resting on her chest like a full stop. She touches it once, then lets it be. Later, as the temple sleeps, you and Io sit by the water again. She asks, do you think she meant it as peace? You shake your head. No, but I think she finally saw you. Io doesn't smile, but her eyes are quiet, rested. She reaches into the water, lets her fingers ripple the reflection of stars. And the fly? It doesn't come back. The river keeps flowing because rivers don't care about divine drama. They've been cutting through the land longer than any pantheon's been bickering. You and Io sit in its shallow hush as the moon balances low over the water. Neither of you speaking, just breathing the thick honeyed air. Her hair, still wet from the bath earlier, curls against her shoulders. The pendant Hera gave her swings lightly with every breeze, like a loaded metaphor that doesn't quite settle. You both know it's not over. Not really. The gods might retreat, but they don't forget. And symbolic gifts always come with fine print. Still, for now it feels like a truce. Or at least a pause in the cosmic HR violations. The temple wakes. Slowly, as it always does. The priests begin their chanting. Merchants set out trays of figs and fish, and a few overeager visitors arrive before dawn, hoping to catch a glimpse of the goddess before breakfast. Io tolerates them with the grace of someone who's been both deified and dehumanized in the same lifetime. She smiles when she feels like it, declines rituals that feel like theater. Once, she tells a priest to stop referring to her as pure. Cow form in liturgy. Say woman of storms if you need a title, she suggests. You notice he doesn't repeat the mistake. Life reshapes around her like clay, adjusting to her presence, her mood, her unwillingness to play the role of passive divine statue. She still walks the temple garden barefoot, still feeds the ibis by hand, still washes her own hair when no one's looking. You think that's part of why they worship her, now not because she commands lightning, but because she doesn't pretend she hasn't been burned by it. But then, just when you think things might finally be easing into a rhythm, a new visitor arrives. He's tall, lean, with eyes like polished stone, and robes dyed in colors you didn't know the desert could make. He doesn't bow, doesn't speak, just stands at the edge of the temple's threshold, watching Io like someone measuring the weight of a rumor. She meets his gaze without flinching. You ask gently, do you know him? Io nods once. He's from Argos. That name hits like a stone in the gut. Argos, her home. Or what used to be. The place she laughed in before her voice turned to moos. Before Zeus, before Hera, before flies and temples and godhood. A place she fled and forgot, but which, apparently, hasn't forgotten her. The man introduces himself as a priest of Hera, of the old order. He says there's unrest. Whispers that the goddess who once wandered as a cow now walks in human form and answers prayers in a land far from her birth. Some say you've forsaken your roots, he says, not unkindly. Io raises an eyebrow, some roots rot. I left before they poisoned me. Still, the message is clear. Her past is knocking. Not as a memory, but a responsibility. Argos is invoking her. Not as the victim, not as the cow, but as the daughter of Inachus. As their own. Here's your mainstream fact. In Greek mythology, Io was the daughter of the river god Inachus, and one of the most prominent heroines from the region of Argos. Her story was foundational for many Argive traditions. Fringe tidbit. Some ancient playwrights reimagined her return as a triumphant homecoming Io the wanderer turned queen, her suffering a kind of trial by divine fire. Historians still argue whether this was myth-making for local pride or a rare moment of narrative. Justice in a genre that usually punished women for existing. The man from Argos invites her to return. Says the people are ready to welcome her, to build her a shrine, to name her protector of the city. You can feel the hesitation coil around Io's shoulders like a python. She says she'll think about it. That night, she walks alone for hours. Through the palms and reeds. You don't follow, not right away. You let her roam. When she returns, she doesn't speak. Just takes your hand and places it over her heart dot, and so you go. Back to Greece. Back to where it began. The journey is quieter this time. No flies, no angry gods hovering behind clouds. No desperate gallops through unfriendly terrain. Just ships, salt wind, and the deep quiet of people who are returning rather than fleeing. Io stands at the prow, eyes fixed on the horizon. When Argos comes into view, a hilly stretch of land framed by olive groves and ruined temples, you see her jaw clench. She doesn't look afraid. She looks like someone preparing for a second reckoning. The people remember. They line the harbor, unsure whether to kneel or cheer. Some bring flowers, some bring stories. One old woman swears she saw Io's shadow in the moonlight every year since she left. Another claims her grandmother was healed by a dream of a golden cow. Myth works fast when it wants to dot. Io doesn't smile. But she nods, accepts their offerings, their confusion, their revisionist loyalty. She's not here for vengeance or glory, just to reclaim what's hers. They give her a hall in the center of the city, an open space where she can speak and teach and rest. She spends mornings walking through the groves, touching trees she once hid behind. She eats meals in the town square, not elevated but present. And the people, slowly, understand that divinity isn't always about fire. Sometimes it's about staying. One night there's a festival, not thrown by gods, just people. They call it Io's Day. It involves less wine than you expect, but more. Laughter. Children dress as cows not mockingly, but with joy, adorning their costumes with gold paint and daisies. One small boy, nose running, hands her a drawing of her standing on a hill with the words, "The cow who came back," scribbled underneath in clumsy Greek. She laughs, loud, full, a sound you hadn't heard since before Egypt. She hugs him. The people cheer. Later, sitting beside the fire, she tells you, "It still aches, all of it. I don't think it ever goes away." You nod. You don't have to pretend it does. She leans her head on your shoulder. But it feels lighter now. You fall asleep under the stars that once watched her run across continents, gods, and expectations. They're quieter now. Watching, maybe, but no longer judging. And in the distance, just faintly, a peacock cries. Not a warning, just a sound. Just a bird being what it is. You stay in Argos longer than planned, because that's the kind of place it is, sticky with memory, slow in the mornings, stubborn in its myths. Io moves through it like a ghost learning how to live again, touching old stones with fingertips that remember what it was like to be made of hooves. She doesn't avoid the temple of Hera, which is awkward for everyone involved. It's still standing, older than some hills, a little lopsided now, like even the architecture is exhausted by centuries of divine grudges. One morning, Io walks up its cracked marble steps barefoot. No announcement, no entourage. Just a woman and her past, face to face. The priestesses inside freeze. One drops a clay jar. Another mutters something about omens. Io steps across the threshold anyway, trailing dust and sunshine behind her like a story reclaiming its pages. You're not allowed in, of course. Mortals and men have their limits here, even if you did help herd a divinized cow across continents. You wait outside with the kind of nervous pacing usually reserved for parents during childbirth. Minutes stretch. Then the temple doors creak open, and Io walks out. Calm, still barefoot. She doesn't say what happened, just nods once and keeps walking. Later, you find out she didn't pray, didn't curse. Just sat in the middle of the sanctum and stared at Hera's statue until someone got uncomfortable and started humming. Hymns off key. That, honestly, says more than 1,000 revenge poems. The town adjusts to her, like clay softening in warm hands. Farmers offer her their best olives. Bakers invent a sweet roll shaped vaguely like a cow. Artists start painting her again, but this time she's standing, human, holding a staff or a lantern, or sometimes just nothing, just standing, like it's enough to exist without symbols. One sculptor offers to carve her likeness in marble. Io politely declines, then suggests he make something for the public baths, instead something functional. He carves a goddess-shaped towel rack. She claps. Everyone applauds. Mainstream myth fact. Io was considered one of the ancestors of many Greek heroes, especially those linked to Argos. She was the great-great-whatever grandmother of Perseus, one of the Age monster slayers. Fringe detail? In some versions of the myth, Io's son Apophis, born in Egypt, was said to be fathered by Zeus, and became a king whose lineage eventually shaped entire dynasties. Historians still argue whether that lineage was mythic retcon or early political propaganda meant to connect divine myth with royal power. Either way, Io's legacy became less about what was done to her, and more about what she became after that, and what she's becoming now is something different. Not just a goddess, not just a survivor, but a presence. A myth with opinions. She teaches girls how to read. Opens a courtyard where people can share stories of their own strange dreams and inherited traumas without fear of being called cursed. She sits with widows who have forgotten how to speak and lets them braid her hair while they cry. Sometimes she sings. Mostly old lullabies from Egypt. Occasionally nonsense ditties she makes up while shelling beans. They get stuck in your head. One day, a scholar arrives. Not from Argos. A young woman from Athens, sharp as obsidian and twice as shiny. She wants to write Io's story the right way. Says too many versions exist. Too many contradictions. It's confusing, she says. People need one clear narrative. Io laughs. People aren't clear narratives. The scholar blinks, a little stunned. But don't you want to control your story? Io shrugs. No, I just want to live it. You can almost hear the scholar's worldview rearranging itself. Still, Io sits for an interview. She speaks slowly, carefully, not because she's guarded, but because she knows words matter. She talks about walking across deserts, dreaming of trees, the feel of her own voice lost in the throat of a cow. She does not mention Zeus until the scholar asks directly, was it love? A long pause. Then, no, but it was power. And sometimes that's what you mistake it for. The scholar writes this down twice. The scroll eventually circulates, copied by scribes, passed from temple to academy, each version slightly altered. Some make her sound more tragic. Others frame her as a triumphant proto-goddess of resilience. A few call her the first mute prophet, which is weird considering she now hosts public debates in the town square. Io reads every copy, corrects none. But sometimes she laughs into her wine. Then, unexpectedly, one morning, she's gone. Not vanished, just missing from the usual places. Not in the square, not in the olive grove, not at the library courtyard where she's been tutoring a girl named Olympus in grammar. You find her eventually down by the river. Not the Nile, not anymore. Just a small Greek river that smells like mint and algae and misplaced nostalgia. She's standing ankle deep in the current, eyes closed, hands loose at her sides. I needed to remember, she says, not opening her eyes. Remember what it felt like before, all of it. You nod, though you're not sure she sees. She smiles. It's quieter here, but the water still moves. That's enough. Then she wades out, soaks her robe to the waist, and sits in the shallows like she's letting the land itself read her scars. Later, back in town, she finally says it. I want to leave again. You're not surprised. Not really. Where did you ask? She shrugs. North, east, I don't know. Somewhere that doesn't already know my story. You nod. I'll pack snacks. And just like that, the next chapter begins. The town doesn't resist her departure. They throw a farewell feast instead, simple, full of bread and music. No statues this time. Just candles and laughter, and a chorus of children mooing in tribute, which makes her laugh so hard she nearly drops her goblet. One of the older priestesses gives her a walking staff. It's not magic. It's not ornate. Just smooth and sturdy, carved from olive wood. Something to lean on, she says. Il bows. You leave at sunrise. Just the two of you again. The same path, somehow different. Fewer gods, more you. Io walks slightly ahead, eyes forward, pendant swinging. You follow, your pack heavy but your heart light. No one says where you're going. And honestly, you don't need to. By the time the first hills roll out beneath your feet, like lazy beasts waking from centuries of naps, it's clear this leg of the journey is less about escape and more about exploration. Io doesn't walk like someone fleeing anymore, no. Frantic glances behind, no tensed shoulders like she's bracing for divine reprimand. She walks like someone curious, each step deliberate but unburdened. The staff helps. It's not enchanted or gold-tipped or blessed by a chorus of doves. It's just a stick smooth from touch, steady in the hand. Still, it gives her something to anchor her weight to when the wind howls a little too much like old voices. You've started calling it the stick of no drama. She pretends to hate it. She doesn't. The road bends northeast, through valleys where olives don't grow but wild herbs do. Thyme, oregano, and something that smells faintly like regret, if regret were edible. You pass through small villages, places too minor to make it into maps but full of stories anyway. One town invites Io to speak at a solstice feast. She declines at first. I'm not a bard, she says. But when they insist, she finally stands under their torch-lit sky, raises her cup and says, I used to be a cow, then sips. The villagers blink. Then they cheer like she just performed a miracle. You end up staying 3 extra days, mostly because they keep making pastries in the shape of hooves, and Io finds that hilarious. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In ancient Greece, festivals often included storytelling sessions where local myths were retold in performative styles. Sometimes they were altered based on who was present. Fringe tidbit: there are fragments of lesser-known poems that mention a wandering priestess of Hera who spoke the tongue of cattle but walked like a queen. Historians still argue whether that was Io or some mythos cousin who got caught in the same god-fueled tangle dot in one of these hamlets. A man approaches, middle-aged, sunburnt, beard like a bush that gave up. He says he knew someone like Io once. Claims she healed his sister by simply standing near her during childbirth. The pain stopped, he says. Just like that. No screaming, just quiet. Io says nothing in response. Just nods, gently touches his shoulder, and moves on. You catch her frowning later. Not sad, not upset. Just distant. They keep trying to make it more than it was, she says. But what if I didn't do anything? You shrug. Maybe being there was enough, she sighs. Then why doesn't it feel like enough to me? You walk in silence for a while. After that dot, eventually, you reach a coast. Not the Greek shoreline you remember, rocky and dramatic, but a softer, gentler curve of land that leads into Asia Minor. The water here smells less like salt and more like rain that forgot it had somewhere to be. A trader offers you both passage across a narrow channel. He charges nothing. Payment in myth, he says. I once heard a cow saved an entire ship from storm. Io blinks slowly. Did she talk too? He laughs like someone who doesn't care if it's true or not. The boat is small but fast. As the oars cut through the water, you watch gulls wheel overhead and wonder how many myths are still floating around out here. Half forgotten, stuck between truth and bedtime lies. You've stopped trying to label things as real or not. At this point, everything's memory-shaped anyway. You arrive in a port city with high walls, suspicious cats, and a temple to Artemis that looks like someone tried to stack a dozen pancakes made of marble and called it architecture. You'll get stopped 3 times before you've even made it past the fish stalls. A child asks if she can bless their doll. An old man offers her his walking stick and says, "Mine has served me well, let it serve you next." She tries to decline. He insists. Now she's carrying 2 sticks. She looks like a shepherd with no flock and too much symbolism. You snort. She elbows you. Here's the thing about Io's new fame. It travels ahead of her, like a rumor with legs. She's not just the goddess from Argos anymore. She's the walking divine, the woman who cried rivers, the moaning mother of mercy, depending on which scrolls people have read or which bard last passed through. Some of the stories are wild. One version claims she healed a lion with a single moo. Another swears she was briefly a storm cloud over Crete. Io reads these aloud at night, dramatically, like she's auditioning for a play she never wanted to join. You both laugh until you cry, but sometimes, late at night, after the campfire has burned to ember whispers, she looks up and says, "What if I become what they say? Not who I am." You consider this. Then maybe it's our job to remind you. She reaches across and squeezes your hand. You always do. As you travel deeper into Anatolia, the landscape shifts. The air gets thinner, the trees taller. You stop in a village where the locals herd goats with the kind of military precision that suggests the goats are unionized. They recognize Io immediately, not by face but by story. The one who wandered, they call her, the one who changed. No temples here, just offerings at a hill shrine made of stacked stones and wishes. Io adds a stone, no prayer, just a gesture. You do the same. Mainstream fact. Anatolia was a cultural melting pot even in the ancient world. Greek, Persian, Hittite, Luwian, it all overlapped. Myths traveled, changed shape. Names were swapped, gods merged. Fringe detail? In some local cults, wandering female figures were seen as protectors of travelers and children. Some even wore cowhorn pendants. Historians still argue whether these were post-Io influences or entirely separate archetypes. You finally stop for a few weeks in a quiet lakeside town where nobody knows her name. Not at first. She gets to be anonymous here. Just a woman with 2 sticks, good posture, and a strange knowledge of plants. She helps a local midwife, teaches a carpenter's daughter how to bind books, plants basil. She even laughs in her sleep now. No one calls her divine. No one asks for a miracle. They just let her be. And she lets herself be too. One night, she turns to you and says, "This feels real." You ask, "More real than temples?" She nods. "More real than anything that came with a title." You grin. "Then let's not go back." She agrees. You lie beside her, under stars so bright they feel unreal, but you don't question them. They shine anyway, and so does she. The lake breathes. That's the only way to describe it. Each morning, a thin layer of mist unfurls across its surface like a veil, rising and falling in slow rhythm, as if the water itself is exhaling. You wake to that sound, the hush of mist. Slipping past reeds, and Io's silhouette kneeling at the shore, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing a tunic with slow circular motions. There's something profoundly domestic about it, absurdly so for a woman who once shared airspace with literal gods. She hums while she works, not hymns, not chants, just nonsense tunes, the kind that don't need meaning to matter. You sit nearby and pretend not to stare. She's different here. Not changed, exactly, just simplified, like a sword cooled. After battle, still sharp but no longer swinging. You've both stopped marking the days. No calendar, no rituals, just tasks. Meals, conversations about nothing. The quiet begins to settle into your bones. One evening, Io says, "I don't think I'm anyone right now." And you say, "Maybe that's exactly what you needed to be." She smiles. "Maybe. The village kids adore her. Of course they do." She fixes their broken toys, helps them make boats out of bark, and never talks down to them. One girl asks if she's a queen. "Worse," Io says. "I used to be a metaphor." The kids don't know what that means, but they laugh anyway. She teaches them how to balance on one foot for an absurdly long time, how to skip stones with precision, and how to detect beehives without getting stung. One boy insists her staff is magic. She tells him, "Only when I lean on it." That becomes a saying in the village, "Only when I lean on it." They paint it on a wall near the bakery. You spend long afternoons gathering herbs. Io knows which ones soothe cramps, which chase away nightmares, and which make your tea taste like regret. You start learning too. She teaches you to listen to plants, not in the "they whisper secrets" way, but in how they grow, bend, resist. "Everything speaks," she says, pressing a wild garlic bulb into your palm. "You just need to stop being louder than the world." Mainstream fact time. Herbal knowledge in ancient cultures was typically passed down through generations of women. Priestesses, midwives, elders, they were the keepers of remedies, the interpreters of nature's moods. Fringe tidbit. There were specific herbs thought to calm the divine, plants offered at temples not just to honor the gods but to pacify them, to sedate their wilder tempers. Historians still argue whether this practice was about genuine belief or just a hopeful form of spiritual bribery. One day, a traveling troupe of performers wanders into town. They juggle. They sing. One of them does an uncanny impression of a lion getting kicked by a goat. It's honestly impressive. They set up a makeshift stage near the market and invite the townsfolk for a night of stories. And of course, because myth has a sense of humor, they perform the tale of Io, not the real Io. Not your eye, oh this version is stylized, ridiculous. Full of exaggerated moves and Zeus portrayed as a himbo in a fake beard. The crowd roars with laughter. Io sits at the edge of the crowd, hood up, expression unreadable. You lean over, ready to whisk her away if it stings too much. But she holds up a hand. "No," she whispers. "Let them." The performance ends with a line that isn't from any version you've heard before, and thus the cow became the storm. The crowd claps. The actors bow. Io stands and claps too. And later in the dark she says, "It was ridiculous. But kind." You nod. Sometimes kindness comes in silly costumes, she adds. At least they didn't say I forgave him. You both laugh too hard at that. The troupe leaves a few days later, but not before one of the actors, a wiry woman with eyes like cracked pottery, asks Io for a blessing. Not for luck or fame, just for clarity. You've seen so much, she says. What should I do with my anger? Io thinks for a long time, then replies, sharpen it, but only cut. What needs cutting? The woman bows. You write it down. You're starting to collect her sayings, not for a scroll, just because they help. Eventually, letters find their way to the village. Word travels, as it always does. A scholar from Miletus sends a scroll asking for her appearance at a symposium. A group of priestesses from Cyrene request guidance on creating a new temple, less focused on divine punishments. Someone in Delphi sends a basket of fruit with a note that reads, just checking in. Are you still divine? Io looks at the basket, then at you, and says, what do you think they expect me to say? You shrug. Say your local produce. Now, mainstream fact, by the classical period, there were multiple versions of Io's story circulating, some depicting her as a tragic pawn, others as a powerful maternal figure. Fringe detail? In a few texts, she's listed not as a goddess, but as a spirit of transformation, closer to a muse than a deity. Historians still argue whether this was an attempt to reframe her story without confronting its original violence. You talk late into the nights now. Not about gods, about nonsense. About why frogs sound like coughing toddlers. About whether constellations are just sky gossip. One night, Io says, do you think the stars care about us? You reply, only when we look at them long enough. She stares at you. You're full of half-lies and poetic garbage. You grin, and yet you keep me around. Only when I lean on you, she says, deadpan. You both burst out laughing. The stars don't blink. Then, one morning, a girl from the village runs into your hut, barefoot and breathless. A ship, she pants, on the lake. You blink. There's no dock. It's still here, she insists. You and I walk down to the shore. Sure enough, a sleek boat carved with unfamiliar runes, unmanned, utterly still floats near the edge. No oars, no sails, just a presence. Like it belongs to no time in every story. Io doesn't speak. She just steps closer, feet pressing into the soft mud, then turns to you. I think it's for me. Your heart tightens. Do you have to go? I don't know, she says. But I think I want to see where it goes. You nod, because you knew this would come eventually. You help her pack, not much, just herbs. A flask, the towel rack sculptor's little wooden cow. She keeps the staff, leaves the second one behind. For the village, she says. In case someone else needs to lean. She hugs you at the edge of the water. Long, no words. Then she steps onto the boat. It moves without movement. Sliding away, lake still undisturbed. She stands at the bow. No divine wind. No dramatic sky. Just her going. You watch until the mist swallows her shape. Then sit down. And wait for the morning to come. The lake is still after she leaves. Too still, like it's holding its breath. You wait for something, maybe a rumble in the sky. Maybe a new constellation blinking into existence. Maybe a feather floating down from nowhere to announce her successful transcendence. But there's nothing. Just water. Just trees. Just the faint outline of her footprints in the mud, already fading. You sit there for a long time, listening to the silence. Not the eerie kind, more like the hush that follows the final note of a song you didn't realize was ending. The villagers come down one by one, standing quietly beside you, like mourners who don't know what they're mourning. Nobody speaks. Nobody cries. Eventually, a child places a stone where the boat had rested. Others follow. By dusk, there's a cairn on the shore, crooked and uneven, but deeply sincere. At the top, Someone lays a cow-shaped pastry. You think Ayo would have laughed at that. You do. The days after are strange. Not empty, just off balance. Like you've grown used to walking with 2 feet, and now one's asleep. You try returning to routines, gathering herbs, helping the baker with inventory, teaching the kids how to whistle with acorns, but everything echoes slightly. The villagers ask about her, of course. Where did she go? What happens next? Is she still a goddess? You answer honestly, I don't know. And weirdly, that seems to satisfy them. Maybe uncertainty feels more authentic than epics these days. Mainstream fact. Many ancient myths ended without closure. Heroes vanished, gods disappeared into rivers, entire stories wrapped up in a single cryptic line. Fringe tidbit? Some oral traditions treated those endings not as finales, but invitations to keep imagining, retelling, expanding. Historians still argue whether open-ended myths reflected a cultural tolerance for ambiguity or a deliberate refusal to grant easy closure. You're starting to understand the appeal. One night, while repairing a cracked water jar, a girl named Phaedra asks, "Do you miss her?" You nod. Every moment. She tilts her head. "Then why are you smiling?" "You hadn't realized you were." "Because," you say, "I think she's finally happy." The girl shrugs. "I still think she should have stayed and opened a bakery." You laugh. She really did like bread. A week passes, then 2. You stop counting after that. The cairn grows taller. People come from other towns now, not because they saw a vision or read a prophecy, but because someone told them there was a place where a goddess once stood and didn't demand worship, just presence. They add things to the cairn. Feathers, seeds, poems scrawled on bark. Someone leaves a small brass bell. No one rings it. It just sits there, quietly waiting. And then, one morning, something changes. It's subtle. A shift in wind direction. A warm current running through the lake. The mist pulls back faster than usual, revealing a figure at the edge of the trees. Not a goddess. Not Io, a woman. Thin, weathered, limping slightly. She collapses before reaching the village path. You run. When you reach her, she's breathing shallowly, covered in dirt and bruises. Eyes unfocused. But you recognize something in her expression: raw exhaustion, mixed with a strange kind of relief. Like she finally stopped running. You carry her back to the village. The healer applies poultices, murmurs calming words, and tucks her into a borrowed cot. That night, the woman wakes long enough to whisper a name. Clea. The next day, she talks. Slowly, cautiously. She was once a priestess. Not of Hera, from a city to the south. She fled when her temple collapsed, figuratively, then literally. A new ruler declared the old gods obsolete. There were protests, she says. Then fires. You ask how she ended up here. She shrugs. I dreamed of a woman. A cow. A path through water. I followed it. You ask if it was a vision. She says, I don't know, but I feel safe now. Io would have liked her. Soon, Clea begins to recover. Helps with chores. Learns how to bake. She's gentle with the kids, sharp with adults, and surprisingly good at mimicking goat noises. The villagers adore her. Someone paints a mural of her laughing near the lake. Another adds a line underneath. Blessed are those who arrive in pieces and stay to heal. Mainstream fact. Many ancient refugee stories were absorbed into mythology. A city destroyed by fire might become the birthplace of a hero. A priestess. Fleeing persecution could be rewritten as a divine messenger. Fringe detail. Some cults even embraced foreign survivors as omens or gifts from the gods, welcoming them with rituals of transformation. Historians still argue whether this was compassion, superstition, or simply practical assimilation. One afternoon, Clea asks about the cairn. You tell her everything. Not just the public story, the real one. The fly, the river, the stick of no drama. You even show her the wooden cow Io left behind. She listens without interrupting. At the end, she says, "Do you think she'd want us to build something?" You ask, "Like a temple?" She smiles. "Like a garden, with no walls." So you start digging. Not alone. Everyone joins. The children plant beans. The elders haul rocks. You and Clea map out circles, one for herbs, one for shade trees, one just for sitting. The cairn stays at the center, now framed by lavender and low stone benches. People call it the Garden of Return. Not because anyone's promised to come back, but because anyone can. A traveling bard stops by, writes a song about a goddess who became a gardener. The tune's catchy. It spreads. One morning as you water the mint, a breeze shifts through the garden, stirring the leaves. For just a second, you swear you hear her laugh low, warm, unfinished. You look around. Nothing. Just sun and green and the sound of bees doing their endless little work. And then you laugh too. Because of course she's here. Just not in the way you thought. Somewhere along the way, people stop asking where Io went and start asking what she meant. It's a subtle shift, but you feel it in the garden. In the way visitors place their offerings, not with desperation, but with reflection. They come less for miracles and more to feel quiet beside something that once moved. They sit by the lavender, run their hands through the thyme, whisper their secrets to the bark of the fig trees. You never advertise the garden. There's no sign, no banner, no monument. Just the cairn, now moss-dappled and half-swallowed by wildflowers. Yet they keep coming. And with each person, the story changes shape. In one version, she was a healer who vanished into mist. In another, she turned into a heron and flew north. One girl insists Io still walks the hills at night, accompanied by a goat that knows every secret name of the wind. You don't correct anyone, not because you're avoiding the truth, but because the truth has become too big to hold in one version. Io, once trapped by a narrative, has become one. You and Clea spend most mornings in the herb circle, tending basil, peppermint, chamomile. She hums while she works, which reminds you so much of Io that you sometimes have to blink hard to stay present. Clea doesn't pry. She knows grief isn't a wound, it's a language. Some days you both just sit in the garden and say nothing for hours. On those days, it feels like the garden grows faster. Mainstream fact. Ancient gardens were often seen as sacred spaces, blending ritual, utility, and beauty. In Egypt and Greece alike, temple gardens were places of prayer and preservation, housing both medicinal plants and symbolic flora tied to deities. Fringe tidbit: a few obscure texts mention wandering sanctuaries, traveling spaces of worship that moved with their caretakers. Some believe these were makeshift gardens, grown from carried seeds, allowing a displaced priestess to rebuild her sanctum wherever she stopped. Historians still argue whether these were real or poetic inventions. The idea of a wandering sanctuary sticks with you. You start sketching little diagrams of movable beds, folding trellises, clay pots designed to survive the road. Clea peeks over your shoulder one day and says, "You're designing a portable myth." You grin. "Is that a bad thing?" She shrugs. "Not if you're willing to keep carrying it." Your news of the garden spreads faster than you expected. A woman from Thessaly shows up with cuttings of a rare vine said to bloom only when touched by someone who's cried for someone else. A merchant from Lesbos offers seeds soaked in moonlight. A Dorian traveler trades a carved wooden spoon for a single sprig of rosemary, whispering that he'll use it to flavor his wife's stew while thinking of Io. The garden becomes a crossroads of small intentions. You wonder if she'd roll her eyes or smile, or both. And then one afternoon, Clea tells you she's leaving. It's not a dramatic announcement. No weeping. No thunderclouds. She's just pulling weeds by the lemon balm and says, "I think it's time." You ask, "Where?" She replies, "East." There's a town by the river that needs someone to teach the girls how to bind books and boil salve. You don't ask her to stay. You know better now. People aren't meant to be kept. You help her pack. 2 satchels. 1 cloak, the wooden spoon from Lesbos. You slip in a folded note with one of Io's old songs. Just lyrics, no melody. Clea hugs you at dawn, tighter than you expected. Then she walks away without looking back. You watch her until she disappears between the olive trees. Then you return to the garden and water the mint twice, because she always said it drank more than it let on. You're alone now. But it doesn't feel like loneliness. More like ... guardianship. The garden hums with familiar life. You know every leaf, every root. You talk to them now, not because you believe they talk back, but because it keeps your voice from rusting. One day you find a letter tucked inside the cairn. No signature. Just a line. Asterisk, I heard she cried for the first time. As a woman by this lake ... asterisk, you fold it and tuck it under a stone. A week later, 2 travelers arrive young, earnest, carrying instruments. They offer to sing for their supper. You say, only if it's a funny song. They deliver. 1 tune about a donkey that falls in love with a rain cloud as you nearly crying into your stew. After dinner, they ask about the garden. You tell them it's a place to remember without regret. They nod solemnly. So like a shrine, one says. You shake your head. More like a pause. That becomes another wall phrase. Asterisk, this is a pause. Not a shrine ... asterisk mainstream fact. In various philosophies, including Stoicism and early mysticism, the act of pausing was a sacred gesture, a moment to feel the present without action or judgment. Fringe tidbit? Some temple initiates were trained to pause for 3 full breaths before answering any question, as a ritual against speaking in haste. Historians still argue whether this was spiritual wisdom or just early social anxiety. Seasons shift. The garden changes. The basil bolts. The lavender blooms longer than expected. You build a trellis from driftwood. You write a new song. Not about Io, about walking with someone who knew how to listen. It doesn't rhyme well. You sing it anyway. Then, one morning, there's a girl at the edge of the path. She's maybe 9, barefoot, clutching a reed basket full of pebbles. She doesn't say her name, just looks around and says, "Is this where the cow woman lived?" You say, "Sort of." She nods like that's enough, then asks, "Can I stay?" You smile. "Only if you help with the rosemary." She agrees. You show her the beds, the compost pile, the trick to keeping slugs off the sage. She doesn't leave. A week becomes a month. She names the lizards in the stone wall. Starts drawing on the garden pots with charcoal. One morning she asks, "Will she come back?" You pause. Then say, "She never left." You're not lying. Every time you pull a weed, hear a breeze hiss through time, or see a cow in the distance chewing slowly like it knows too much, you feel her. Not as a ghost. Not as a god. As a rhythm, a thread, a reminder that even the strangest journeys can end in stillness that feels like a beginning. And the girl? She plants a new row of onions and says, "When I grow up, I'm going to walk until the road ends." You nod. "Good plan. Take snacks," she grins, "and a stick." You laugh, especially that. You think about sending a message out, maybe a new story, a new scroll. But instead, you just sit by the cairn, watch the lake reflect the sky, and whisper a thank you to the wind, not to be heard. Just to remember the sound of gratitude leaving your lips. Somewhere, a bird calls. Not a peacock, just a bird, and you smile. The girl's name is Lise. You find this out a few days after she's already settled into the rhythm of the garden. Her basket of pebbles now half buried in the mint patch. A stick she's adopted as her own strapped across her back like a warrior. In training, you only realize you don't know her name when a traveling merchant asks, "Who's your helper?" And she answers, I'm Lise. I work with the plants that remember. The merchant blinks. You nod. She's in charge of the fennel. And she is. The fennel's never been happier. Ly. S is a whirlwind of questions, observations, and unsolicited opinions. She wants to know why rosemary smells like sadness, why cows blink so slowly, and whether thunder means the sky is angry or just indigestion. She makes up names for everything. The bees are the humming cousins. The well is the whisper hole. The cairn is Io's rock stack of no regrets, which you initially try to correct but then stop because honestly, it's not. Wrong. She's the first child you've seen treat the myth of Io not with reverence, but with curiosity. Not once does she ask for a miracle. Instead, she wants to know what kind of flowers Io liked, if she ever danced, whether she farted as a cow. You laugh so hard the first time she asks that you nearly fall into the parsley bed. Lise just shrugs. Gods are still people, sort of. You write that on a flat stone and place it near the entrance. Mainstream fact. In many Hellenic mystery religions, children were believed to have a special relationship with the divine, not because they were innocent, but because they hadn't yet learned to fear or flatter the gods. Fringe tidbit. Some rural rituals invited children to speak freely to the gods on behalf of adults, believing their raw, unfiltered honesty cut through all the ritual noise. Historians still argue whether these practices were theological insights or early crowd control tactics. Ly decides one afternoon that she wants to create a ceremony. Not a worship thing, she says. Just ... something that feels right. You're intrigued. She gets to work, dragging stones into a circle, braiding reeds into crowns, collecting bits of glass she calls lake jewels. On the night of the full moon, she leads a group of children and 2 adults who thought it was a game into the garden and begins her ritual. It involves singing a made-up song that sounds suspiciously like a chicken dance, whispering secrets to a log, and placing one hand over your heart while moving softly toward the stars. You expect it to be ridiculous. It is. And it's perfect. Because what it does without incense or sermons or declarations is remind you that stories can breathe. That rituals don't have to belong to temples or scrolls. They can belong to people, especially little ones with strong opinions and muddy feet. That night, as you sit watching the moonlight silver the lake, Lise curls up beside you and asks, "Do you think she knows we still think about her?" You answer, "I think that's the only reason she ever mattered at all." Lise nods like this is obvious, then falls asleep with her hand still on your arm. Visitors continue to arrive. Not floods, just trickles. People who heard about the garden from a friend, a song, a dream. A woman from Lydia brings a carved amulet she insists was given to her by a talking deer. A man from Euboea carries a flute. He hasn't played since his wife died, but wants to try again, in a place that doesn't demand silence. You sit with each one, not as a guide, just as someone who stayed long enough to be trusted. Eventually, the garden gets its first storm in months. It hits hard wind like a drunk god knocking over clouds, rain that tastes metallic, thunder so low it rattles your teeth. The plants survive, though the lavender takes a hit. The cairn is scattered, the bench near the basil splits. And in the morning, Lise looks at the debris and says, she visited again. You raise an eyebrow. You think the storm was her? Lise shrugs, or maybe just the weather. But either way, it was loud and left stuff messy. Feels like her. You rebuild, together. And you don't reset the cairn exactly, you let it grow sideways now. Less tidy, more real. Mainstream fact. Ancient sites often rebuilt altars and monuments after disasters, sometimes preserving the damage as part of the sacred narrative. Fringe tidbit. Some temples deliberately left certain stones askew, believing perfection angered the gods. Historians still argue whether that's true, or if it was just a fancy way to explain bad masonry. After the storm, something shifts in you too. You start drawing again, something you haven't done since before Egypt. Not portraits, just impressions. The bend of a reed in wind, the shadow of a stick leaning against a tree, a cow mid-stride with one eye looking back. You don't show them to anyone, not at first. But eventually, Lise finds them and starts naming each one like characters in a play. This one's the Queen of Mud. This one is called Thunderbutt. This one is just named Bob. You let her. One morning, you find a note in the cairn. Simple, no decoration. Just, asterisk, the garden is still growing. So am I remember. You, asterisk, no name. But you know. You fold it carefully and slide it between the pages of your old travel book, the one that still smells like Nile dust and olive oil. Then another letter comes. Then two. One from a temple in Delos asking to replicate the garden. Another from a woman in Corinth who wants to name her daughter after the goddess who forgave nothing but found peace. You write back to both, politely, kindly, but with a reminder. Io didn't want a church. She wanted space. So that's what you keep making. Space. For people, for plants, for stories that haven't found their endings. And you begin to realize that maybe you've become something too, not a priest, not a prophet, but a keeper of something fragile and persistent. The hum that remains after the tale has been told. The stillness where myths can rest without performance. You sit in the garden each dusk and listen to the wind. Sometimes it brings words, sometimes just the rustle of fennel. And, on the rarest nights, it carries laughter that sounds exactly like hers. That's enough. That's always enough. Some mornings, you wake before the birds. Not because of dreams or restlessness, but because the garden seems to breathe differently just before dawn. It exhales mist, dew, and that particular green hush that only plants understand. You sit, with a mug of something warm and bitter, mint, maybe, or rosemary steeped too long, and watch the world uncrease. Lise joins you sometimes, her hair a tangle of sleep and questions. Do you think the stars ever get bored? She'll ask. Or, if a cow becomes a goddess, does a goat become a prince? You've stopped trying to answer. Now you just say, let's ask the fennel later. The garden has grown, not just in size but in attitude. It's sprawling now, blissfully unkempt in places, tidy in others where the kids have claimed their little patches. There's a wildflower bed called the Cow's Crown, a bench carved with Io's face mid-laughter, and a little stone labyrinth that someone insists leads nowhere on purpose. People leave offerings like it's a mailbox for memory, dried. Figs, locks of hair, half-finished songs on scraps of parchment. No one steals, no one rearranges. The offerings sit where they fall, like the ground itself decides what stays. You've become a fixture. Not a leader, not a sage, just a trusted shadow. People seek you out for stories, for reminders, for quiet. You find yourself retelling the tale of Io differently every time. Some days she's a warrior. Other days, she's a runaway. Sometimes she's the wind. You always include the cow part, though. It grounds the myth in absurdity. Keeps it human. Even gods get turned into things they don't ask for, you say. But the trick is staying yours inside it. Mainstream fact. Mythological figures like Io were often used to represent wider themes: persecution, transformation, endurance, but their tailies were elastic, reshaped for each era. Fringe tidbit? In some pre-Hellenic traditions, the cow was a symbol not of victimhood, but of cosmic travel, linked to lunar cycles and dream states. Historians still argue whether Io was originally a moon deity folded into a more patriarchal myth or simply a story that evolved with its listeners. Then one evening, as the sun slips down the lake like a coin into a wishing well, a stranger arrives, hooded, silent, no pack, no visible reason for being there. They sit by the cairn for hours without moving. just staring at the rocks like they're reading a language lost to everyone else. You approach gently, offer them tea. They accept without words. Finally they say, "She passed this way." "Didn't." "She?" You nod. "A while ago." The stranger doesn't ask where she went. Instead they say, "I followed a dream. One where I was running as a deer through thorns. She was there." Sighed. Don't stop, even when they call it worship. They don't elaborate. Just sip the tea and fall asleep by the cairn. You cover them with your old travel cloak and leave a sprig of sage by their head. The next morning, they're gone, but the cloak is folded. And the cairn has one more stone. These moments happen more frequently now, the uncanny, the in-between. One day, a musician shows up and plays a melody that makes the bees fly in spirals. Another day, a woman arrives who swears she was born with the name Io, though she has no idea why. She stays 3 days, paints a mural on the compost wall, then leaves without a goodbye. You stop trying to catalog it all. The garden doesn't need records. It remembers through roots. One late summer night, a firefly lands on your thumb and refuses to move. You stare at it for minutes. It blinks. You blink. Then Lise leans over and says, "It's probably her, checking on the parsley." You laugh, but leave the light there until it flies away. Just in case, the idea of traveling again starts to tug at you, not urgently. Just a gentle pull. You think about the Nile, about Egypt, about deserts that swallowed footprints and temples built by hands that remembered pain as instruction. You start sketching again, maps that lead nowhere, symbols that feel more like questions. You ask Lise one morning, "Would you come with me if I left?" She frowns, then says, "Only if you take the stick of no drama." It's leaning against. The herb shed, still sturdy, still splattered with stories. "Deal," you say, but before you can leave, something happens. Not divine, not explosive. Just human. An illness spreads, not like a plague. Not the kind that turns temples into ghost towns, but enough to hush the village, enough to fill beds and dry wells. People stop traveling. The garden becomes a place of care, herbs ground into pastes, teas brewed to cool fevers. You become a healer by necessity. Lise runs bundles of sage too. The sick, you sleep little. Cry less, focus more. In those weeks, Io's myth shifts again. Now she's the protector of breath, of rest, of quiet strength. Someone carves that into the cairn. Io, who kept walking through everything, even when she couldn't moo about it. Eventually, the illness fades, like fog, slowly but decisively. Life returns. The kids play again. Travelers resume their cautious wanderings. You look around and realize you never needed to leave to move. The garden grew into the world, and you, keeper of its paws, had become a myth yourself, if only by staying present while everything else changed shape. Mainstream fact. Long after their original worship faded, many ancient goddesses lived on as symbols in folk medicine, regional charms, and agricultural rites. Fringe tidbit? In rural parts of Greece and Anatolia, old women still whisper to the silent cow mother when tending to the dying. No one knows who she is, but they say she listens. Lys gets taller. The lake gets quieter. One morning she announces, "I think I want to leave soon." You don't ask why, you just nod. Help her pack. Her satchel is full of herbs, drawings, and a broken bit of bench from the basil patch. "For luck," she says, "or firewood." You hug her by the cairn. She whispers, "She's in the soil now," you say. "She's in us." Lise grins, "We're funnier than the scrolls say." You watch her disappear into the mist. Then, you sit by the lake, alone again. But not empty. You take out the stick, tap it once on the ground. "All right," you say. "What's next?" And the wind answers. Not with words, but with the soft rustle of lavender swaying, like laughter, like memory. like a god who forgot how to be feared and learned how to be kind. Autumn arrives with a slow exhale. The garden softens, basil going to seed, lavender thinning, mint curling brown at the tips. You don't mind. Decay here feels like punctuation, not erasure. You walk the perimeter in the morning mist, stick of no drama in one hand, a cup of sour fig tea in the other. The lake glows pale gold, reeds bowing in a rhythm that feels like a nod from the past. No birds, just that quiet, wet breath of a season settling in. You're alone now, properly alone. Not a tragic alone, but the kind that lets you hear your own heartbeat echo back through the leaves. Lisa's gone. The last traveler left you a song scrawled on parchment and a cracked bowl in exchange for 2 lemons. It's been days since anyone spoke to you. You don't mind the silence. You feed it. Your routine becomes a dance of gentle repetition. Wake, water, listen, sketch, nap under the fig tree if the sun stays warm long enough. You think about Egypt sometimes, its heat, its strange stillness, the way you looked at the Nile like it was both cradle and mirror. You wonder if she still walks there, or if she's vanished into myth entirely, drifting between prayers and bedtime stories. One morning you find a child's drawing tucked under the bench by the time. It's smeared with rain, but the image is clear. A stick figure cow standing next to a tree labeled Io's house. You smile, no name, no offering, just presence. You add it to the little archive you've started in the garden shed, a collection of stones, scribbled notes, songs, whispered jokes and charms, not for worship, for memory. Mainstream fact. In many pre-modern communities, myth was stored not only in stories, but in physical tokens, amulets, carvings, children's drawings believed to carry part of a deity's essence. Fringe tidbit. Some folk traditions included burying sacred drawings under herb gardens, believing it gave the plants voices. Historians still argue whether this was an act of devotion or just a quiet way of keeping children busy in the fields. It's on one of those quiet days that you finally write to Argos. Not a scroll, not a formal letter, just a note, short and clear. The garden still grows, the story still breathes. She didn't fade, she changed. You tie it to a traveler's pack with instructions to leave it with anyone who remembers cows with complicated pasts. It's not a call to worship, just a hello. You've kept your sketches close. They've grown more detailed, more symbolic trees. Shaped like women, waves curling into cow horns, eyes hidden in root systems. You pin them around the shed, not because you want to show them off, but because it reminds you of the way Io looked at things quietly, from the side, waiting to see if they'd reveal themselves. The first frost hits unexpectedly. You find the parsley shivering. You don't cry, but you place extra stones around it, whispering, "Sorry, green friend." You press your palm to the earth and feel a familiar hum, not divine, not mythic, just warm, just real. That night, you build a fire. The sky is scattered with stars like salt over fresh bread. You sit beside the flames and sing one of Io's Egypt songs, one you made up, then forgot, then remembered by accident. Half the lyrics are gibberish. All of it feels holy. Not in the sense of gods, in the sense of something whole. You're halfway through your third verse when someone coughs behind you. You spin. Woman stands at the edge of the light, cloaked, dusty, barefoot. She's holding a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. Stare. She grins. "I brought something. Fig and fennel, still warm." You don't speak, just move aside. She sits. You tear the bread. Offer half. She takes it. Chews. "I like the song," she says. Still nonsense, though. You laugh, breathless. "Io," she shrugs. "Some days you want to ask 100 questions. Where she's been, what she's seen, why now? But all that comes out is, are you okay?" She looks at the fire. "I wasn't. Then I was. Then I wasn't again. Now I'm still walking." She taps the ground with her heel. But this feels like a place to stop for a minute. So you sit, eat, share a flask, pass her the stick. She twirls it like a baton, inspecting the notches. Still ugly, she says. You smirk. Still yours. Mainstream fact. Mythological returns are rarely about resolution. Odysseus doesn't come home unchanged. Orpheus doesn't get Eurydice back. But returns still matter. They're proof that the road didn't eat you whole. Fringe tidbit. Some versions of Io's myth have her returning not to rule, not to bless, but just to rest. To be seen again as herself, not her story. Historians still argue whether those versions were suppressed or simply forgotten. She stays 3 days. You don't ask for more. She walks the garden in silence, touches every plant, adds 3 stones to the cairn, leaves a new song on the compost. While a cow-shaped melody that sounds like wind trying not to wake anyone. The villagers trickle in when they hear rumors. No one bows, they just nod, offer figs, sit with her under the olive trees like they've known her for years. On the last day, she paints a symbol on the bench where the basil died. A spiral inside a hoof. Beneath it, she writes, Asterisk, I walked through fire. I grew mint. Asterisk, you don't say goodbye. She leaves with the same quiet she returned with. Just a smile. A touch to your shoulder. A whisper. Keep the pause. And she's gone. Not vanished. Just elsewhere. You return to the fire that night. Add a new log. Stir the embers. Sing her song. And the garden listens, like it always has. Winter arrives in stages, first in the way the shadows lengthen a little earlier each afternoon, then in the scent of pine smoke, and finally in the ache that settles into your knees before the rest of your body feels the cold. The garden does what gardens do in winter. It contracts. Not dies, just breathes in. The mint retreats underground. The thyme goes brittle. Even the lavender folds into itself like it's remembering something private. You walk the edges with your hands in your pockets and your heart in 2 places, here and wherever she is. AO. Return, brief and quiet, left a warmth that refuses to cool. The garden remembers. The cairn feels more solid somehow. The cow-shaped melody she painted on the compost wall remains untouched by rain. You sometimes catch yourself humming it under your breath while sorting seeds or chasing stubborn beetles from the chard. The spiral and hoof symbol she left on the basil bench has been copied a dozen times onto stones, drawings, even the hilt of someone's walking stick. It's not religious. It's not sacred. It's just hers, a proof of passage. A soft yes from the universe that someone like her was here and chose to leave something behind that wasn't punishment or prophecy, just continuity. The visitors don't stop. They just change. Fewer wanderers now, more locals. People from nearby towns, old friends of lease. Travelers who remember a moment of peace here and want to re-feel it before the year turns harsh. You've stopped introducing yourself. You're just the one who waters the garden and sometimes tells stories if the tea is hot and the company patient. One girl from a fishing village arrives with a tale about a dream cow who told her not to marry a man with eyebrows like storm clouds. So, I left him, she says. Bought a boat. You nod. She gives good advice. One afternoon, you find an old man weeping beside the cairn. You sit beside him, don't ask. Eventually he says, my daughter died. She was 14. She loved cows. You place a pebble in his palm. So does the garden. He returns the next day with a carved wooden cow. You place it near the parsley. Mainstream fact. Winter was often seen in myth as a time of reflection and underworld. Closeness, a season where the veil between here and there grew thin. Fringe tidbit. In some rural Greek traditions, cows were believed to be vessels of dreaming during winter. Their breath said to carry lost names into the clouds. Historians still argue whether this is metaphor, magic, or a side effect of living. In close proximity to livestock and loneliness, the wind gets louder as the days shorten. It whistles through the garden like it's reading something out loud. You sleep more, dream less. The garden becomes its own lullaby. In the morning, the frost outlines each leaf in silver, and you think of her footprints in Egypt, in Greece, in mud and sun and myth. You think of her walking into the mist, and how the mist seems to settle differently now, like it knows how to carry weight better than before. You start reading the old scrolls again, not to retell them, to argue with them. You underline lines that feel dishonest. Scribble "nope" in the margins beside any passage where I-O is described as passive or silent or symbolic. You write your own version in the back of a broken ledger. Not for anyone else, just for the record. Io was a person, then a cow, then a person again, but not the same one. And she should never have had to explain that to anyone. You underline that 3 times. One night, snow falls. Soft, reluctant, like the sky is unsure it's allowed to touch this place. You sit in the shed, fire crackling, reading an old poem someone left in the cairn. It's written in rough hand, misspelled, but beautiful. You were not born to graze, but to gallop, to ruin soil with your pace. You do not owe anyone your shape. You pin it above your workbench. Later, you hum her song. You hear the wind pause. You smile. Then just before dawn, something happens. Not loud, not dramatic. Just there. You wake to find hoofprints in the snow. Small, deliberate. UNCFOD. You follow them, slowly, careful not to blur them with your own steps. They curve around the parsley, loop near the cairn, stop at the fig tree, and then vanish. There's no body, no cow, no shadow. Just the prints. You kneel, touch one. It's real, deep, fresh. You don't speak. You just sit beside them as the sun rises and turns the snow to light. Later, a traveler arrives. Says they dreamed of a woman with gold in her teeth and hooves for hands who told them to come here and rest. She didn't say who she was, the traveler adds, but I felt okay, like I wasn't being asked for anything, just noticed. You offer them tea. You don't tell them about the HOOFPRINTS. Mainstream fact. In mythology, epiphanies, moments of sudden divine presence, often happen in the smallest, stillest forms. Footprints, smells, fleeting animal glimpses. Fringe tidbit? Some obscure cults believed a god's power could inhabit the earth just enough to press a shape into snow, stone, or sand as a reminder they'd passed through. Historians still argue whether this was belief or just good storytelling. Winter deepens. You seal the cracks in the shed, knit another layer. Brew stronger tea. The garden sleeps but never stops. You plant garlic, cover the soil with straw, press your palm to the dirt and say, rest easy. You reread the songs. You carve another stick, this one not for drama, but for walking with someone someday who doesn't know where to go yet. Then one evening, a child runs up from the lake path, breathless and wide-eyed. There's a woman down there. They gasp. She's sitting in the water, smiling, but she's not cold. You nod, walk slowly toward the lake. You find nothing. Just ripples. Just light, and something left behind on the rock. A golden pendant, shaped like a cow's eye. You pick it. Up. It's warm. Still humming. You don't put it on. You place it on the cairn. Then sit beside it. Close. Your eyes. And listen. She is not gone. She is not returning. She is everywhere the story refuses to close. The pendant sits atop the cairn for days, untouched, gleaming faintly in the rare sunlight like it's made of memory instead of gold. People notice it. Of course they stop, stare, kneel, whisper, but no one takes it. You leave it there deliberately. Not as an artifact, not as a relic, as punctuation. The kind that doesn't end a sentence, but changes the tone of everything that follows. You polish it once with a soft cloth and murmur, "You're not a souvenir." The pendant doesn't reply. It just stays, present, quiet. Like her, winter holds on longer than expected. The frost digs deep, making even the most stubborn rosemary brittle. You shift your days indoors, sorting through the archives in the shed. Pages and pages of sketches, letters, poems, receipts for traded herbs, and ridiculous maps Lise once drew with every footpath labeled Secret Goat Road. You find her handwriting everywhere now, curled between margins, scratched onto the underside of benches, once even carved into a pumpkin. This is now a blessed gourd. You laughed so hard you nearly dropped the seeds. You begin cataloging everything not for a museum, not for anyone's approval, but so the story has legs long after yours give out. One scroll becomes a diary. Another, a rotating menu of garden teas with names like Cow Whisperer, Zeus Free Zinger, and Trauma Mint. You pin up a sign that reads, "Ask before you harvest, unless you're a goddess." A bard copies that into a song and takes it to Athens. You find out a month later that someone in a tavern there turned it into a drinking chant. Mainstream fact. Across the Hellenic world, small sanctuaries often evolved into community spaces, part chapel, part clinic, part cultural salon. Over time, their mythic roots blended with everyday life. Fringe tidbit? In a few dusty footnotes of rural temple records, there are references to the cow's shrine, used not for animal worship, but as a metaphor for a place where silence grows back. Historians still argue whether this was a poetic idiom or an undocumented EO cult. You don't bother arguing. You live there. Then, out of nowhere, she sends a letter. No fanfare. No courier. Just a folded piece of papyrus tucked into the cleft of the old fig tree one morning. You find it while gathering windfall. The script is unmistakable, loopy, casual, like someone writing while walking. Asterisk, still walking. Sometimes east. Sometimes. In circles, gave someone my shoes. Watched a goat give birth. Laughed until I cried. Told a lie about a river. It forgave me. Thought about the garden. Thought about the stick. Hope you're still annoying tourists with your dramatic basil. Love. Kind of always in the quiet spaces. AO. Asterisk, you reread it 6 times. Then you copy it by hand into the ledger of unscheduled events. You don't write back, not because you don't want to, but because you know, somehow. You hear it when you hum to the garlic. You hang the letter in the shed next to the cow-shaped melody. You think about starting a wall titled, "She Still Moves," filled with every sighting, every dream, every hoof-shaped echo people bring to your door. You decide against it. Too tidy. Too finished. Instead, you carve a tiny spiral into the bench leg and say nothing. Visitors come and go. One leaves a painting, a cow made of stars floating across a sky stitched with herbs. Another teaches you a dance meant to mimic grazing. It's absurd, you do it anyway. Someone builds a wind chime shaped like hooves. It sounds like rain and secrets. And then a group of young scholars arrive from a coastal city, eager, nervous, full of scrolls and agendas. They say they're writing a thesis on the evolution of Io's myth in post-oracular settlements. They quote historians, compare cultic fragments, ask for artifacts. One tries to measure the cairn with twine. You stop him. It's not a monument, you say. It's a conversation. He doesn't understand. But one of the others, a girl with ink-stained fingers and an exhausted posture, sits beside. You later and whispers, "What was she really like?" You smile. Tired. Funny. Terrifying in the best way. She nods like that's exactly the answer she hoped for. Mainstream fact. Academic inquiry into living myths often becomes an act of chasing ghosts with a notebook. Fringe tidbit. A banned pamphlet from a minor Athenian philosopher once argued that God should be studied by gardening, not debating. He died broke but content. You think he would have liked your tea. The scholars leave behind a scroll titled Io and the Geography of Persistence. You skim it. It's fine. Overthought, oversighted, underfelt. You use the back for your planting schedule. One day, a woman arrives with a baby, says nothing, just sits near the fig tree. After an hour, she speaks. My child doesn't sleep unless we're near dirt. You say, some of us are just born closer to the ground. She nods, leaves the next day. You find a pacifier tucked into the parsley. You leave it there. You start noticing patterns. The same owl visiting every third night. A vine growing in the shape of a spiral on the back wall. The wind chime never ringing when you're alone. A child drawing a stick figure cow with wings, then saying she doesn't need them. She just wanted them for fun. You smile more now. Not because everything's easy, but because everything keeps going. One morning, while sorting dried lemon balm, you find something wrapped in cloth. It's the wooden cow Lise once carved, the one that disappeared last spring. There's a new marking on its side, a spiral inside a hoof. You place it by the pendant, say, welcome back. Then you sit by the cairn and begin humming her song. Wind picks it up, carries it back to wherever she's walking now, and you hope the ground is soft, and the sky forgiving, and the story she's telling still hers. Spring doesn't arrive like a celebration. It tiptoes in, humble and half apologetic, like someone crashing a funeral with a basket of crocuses. You notice it first in the smell. The garden, still sleepy, exhales a breath of turned soil and thawed root. Then come the bees' hesitant scouts at first, bumping into leftover wind chimes and staggering off like drunk messengers from Persephone. You wake one morning to find the thyme bush blooming despite your neglect. You stare at it like it's a message in a language only the plants know. Then you whisper, thanks, and step out of its way. The cairn remains, of course, and the pendant still sits at its center, slowly oxidizing to a soft, divine tarnish. Someone's etched around it, now not words, just symbols. A wave, a leaf, a curled sleeping cow. You don't know who did it. That's how things work here. People leave things behind like stories, shedding old skins. The basil bench has new carvings, two tiny spirals you suspect are the work of local kids, bored or inspired or both. You don't correct them. You just polish the wood and mutter a blessing that might be a joke or might be sacred. Hard to tell these days. You've begun keeping track of dreams again. Not because you believe they predict anything, but because they seem to arrive carrying echoes. A woman with seaweed hair laughs in your sleep and says, the myth was never the point. One night you dream of Io drinking wine with Hera. They don't speak. They just toast. Then hurl their goblets at a wall and walk away. You wake up laughing, the kind that leaves tears on your pillow. Mainstream fact. Dreams were central to many ancient religious traditions. Oracles, priests, and even farmers consulted dreams before making decisions. Fringe tidbit? A few surviving. Dream books claim that dreaming of a cow is a sign of reconciliation, either with your past, your mother, or a god who won't stop sending flies. Historians still argue whether the cow dream was meant to be taken literally or as a coded reference to suppressed trauma. You're inclined to believe it's both. The garden, now buzzing with slow, blooming life, begins attracting a different kind of visitor. Not just those chasing myth, but people who want to stay. Not forever, just long enough to remember something. You start calling them the lingering. They arrive tired, don't say much, and usually leave behind a sketch, a seed, or a strange-shaped pebble. One woman builds a tiny house out of stacked shells under the lemon balm and whispers to it every night before bed. You ask what she's saying. She answers, I'm teaching it to hold grief. You leave her tea in a warm cloak. You don't ask again. You host a storytelling circle once a week now. People gather in the half-wild center of the garden and take turns speaking about loss, about odd dreams, about recipes that don't quite work. The rule is, nothing must be true, but everything must be real. One girl tells a story about a cow who turned into a thundercloud, then a puddle, then a song. Another man shares a joke about Zeus losing his sandals in a puddle of divine cow dung. You laugh so hard you spill your tea. No one asks for citations. That's the rule. You've developed a reputation for being unhelpful in all the right ways. When someone asks if Io was a victim or a hero, you say, yes. If they want to know whether she ever really forgave Zeus, you reply, she didn't wait around long enough to decide. And when a philosopher shows up with a scroll titled Cow Consciousness in Pre-Classical Matriarchal Symbolism, you offer him mint tea and show him where the compost pile is. He leaves 3 days later with dirt under his fingernails and a poem about cows that cry rain. Mainstream fact: forgiveness, in myth, is often retroactive, tacked on by later generations trying to polish the rough edges. Fringe tidbit: in one forgotten inscription on a crumbling altar in Delphi, there's a reference to the daughter who walked beyond punishment. Some scholars think it's about Io, others think it's a misreading of a list of livestock. You prefer the first version. It smells better. You find a scroll in the bottom of your archive, shed one afternoon, older than anything you remember. Saving. It's brittle, nearly dust. But one phrase jumps out. She turned her silence into soil. You don't remember writing it. You don't remember reading it. But you whisper it aloud, and the parsley flutters like it recognizes the tone. You start adding signs throughout the garden. Some helpful. Asterisk, yes, you can touch the rosemary. It likes compliments, some not. Do not offer sacrifices. We're full. Asterisk, others just absurd. This rock is not Io, she's busier than this. One kid leaves behind a drawing of Io as a superhero, complete with cape and mood justice emblazoned on her chest. You hang it proudly in the shed. One traveler laughs so hard he leaves behind a bag of almonds and a song about revenge cows. You memorize the chorus. You don't hear from Io again. Not directly, but the signs continue. A circle of hooves in the moss one morning. A spiral drawn in dust on your windowsill. A woman passing through who says, I met someone in Thrace who told me I walk like I used to be a storm. You nod. That tracks. You wonder sometimes if she's settled. Found a place to grow things with less interruption. But deep down, you don't think so. Io was never about endings. She was about surviving the middle long enough to carry it into something softer, something rooted, something that never once asked you to be grateful for the pain, but dared you to grow anyway. So you keep tending the garden. You keep rewriting the scrolls and the margins of your days. You keep saying no to monuments and yes to hammocks. And when people ask, what kind of place is this? You say, it's where myths rest. Not die, not transform, just breathe. And that's enough. It rains for 3 days straight. The kind of rain that doesn't roar or punish, just lingers, gentle, soaking, persistent. You watch it blur the outlines of everything. The cairn, the herb beds, the cow-carved bench, your boots. The garden drinks. It all in quietly, like a story you tell yourself in a whisper. You sleep longer. Write slower, think more. There's something about rain that pulls the memories up from the soil. You spend more time in the shed, sorting through what you've come to call the living archive. It's not organized, no catalog system. Just drawers full of offerings, drawings, letters, feathers, beads, phrases scratched into wood. Some are hilarious. Beware the lettuce of regret. Some heartbreaking. I came here to forget him. I remembered myself instead. You don't curate them. You let them be. They're not meant to be edited. Just remembered. On the third night, the rain finally stops, and the sky clears like someone finally finished crying. You step outside. The earth squishes under your sandals. The air is thick with petrichor and the aftertaste of something old. You walk to the cairn. There's a new stone on top, a flat one, painted with a spiral and one word beneath it. Still, you don't know who left it. It doesn't matter. You add a rosemary sprig beside it and say, Yeah, still. Then you sit there until the birds start again. Mainstream fact. In many cultures, rain is associated with divine communication, not the angry kind, but a slow cleansing. In Greek tradition, even Zeus's storms could mean release, not just wrath. Fringe tidbit: there's a nearly forgotten festival in Arcadia where people left silent offerings in the rain to honor goddesses who had endured suffering without retaliation. Historians still argue whether this was about Io Demeter or some unnamed river spirit. You think it might have been all three. The garden starts humming again. Not literally, though one visitor insists she heard a lullaby in the wind, but in rhythm. Shoots push up where you thought nothing survived. Bees return, drunk and noisy. A frog takes up residence in the mint bed. You name him Themistocles. He ignores you. One morning, a woman arrives in soaked sandals with a pack full of broken necklaces. She doesn't speak much. She wanders the garden, tracing each bench, each herb, each little offering nook like she's reading a map. At the fig tree, she stops, sits, waits. You make tea. Bring it to her. She nods her thanks, then finally says, "Is it true that she never forgave him?" You don't answer. You just hand her a sprig of rue and say, "Sometimes growing past someone is louder than forgiving them." She breathes that in like it's medicine. Later, you find a piece of parchment tucked into the time. It reads, "I thought forgiveness was a door. Turns out it's just a window I don't have to climb through." You tack it to the shed wall next to the comic someone drew of Io wearing sunglasses and kicking the god into a river. The stories keep coming. Man who left his priesthood after dreaming of a cow leading him out of a burning building. Girl who saw a woman with horned shadows in her reflection every time she tried to lie. Couple who claim they conceived their daughter after chanting Io's name beside a dying lemon tree. You don't sort truth from fiction anymore. You let the garden decide. You write less now. Not because the words are gone, but because they're rooted deeper. You say them out loud, casually, as you water the sage or nudge a wayward vine back into place. Myth is what memory uses when it doesn't want to be fact anymore. Pain doesn't make you holy. Survival doesn't owe anyone beauty. Sometimes you just need a place to sit and moo inside your mind. That one makes a 12-year-old visitor snort so hard, she spits tea across her tunic. You gift her a handkerchief with a cow embroidered on it. She swears she never. Forget it. You believe her. Mainstream fact. Myths evolve not because people get smarter, but because they get braver. They ask different questions. They let go of fear. Fringe tidbit. A now lost fragment from the pre-Socratic poet Ephesia reads, "Let not the cow be chained again to a god's apology. Let her walk, and let us walk with her." You have that carved on the inside of your shed door now. Then one sunset, just when the light softens enough to blur the edges of the world, something shifts. Not a sound, not a vision, just a presence. You're sitting by the basil, hands muddy, shirt damp from mist when it happens. A weight lifts not from your body, but from the garden. Like something that had been watching finally exhaled. You feel it in the soil, in the wind, in the space between two syllables of her name. You sit back, smile. "She left again," you say aloud. "Didn't she?" There's no answer, but there is a scent wild thyme and fig, sharp and soft all at once, and something new blooming in the dirt beside the spiral. Stone. You dig gently. It's a flower you don't recognize. Pale gold. Shaped like an ear. Not human. Not bovine. Just listening. You leave it be. The next morning, a stranger arrives. Dusty. Nervous. Clutching a woven bag full of seeds. She stares at the garden. At the cairn. At you. "I don't know why I came," she says. You offer tea. She sits. After a long pause, she asks, "Can I just be quiet here?" You nod, "Of course." And for the rest of the day, neither of you speaks. You just listen to the wind, dot to the weeds, dot to the echo of hooves in the distance, dot still, dot always, dot still. You wake at dawn to a sky that feels too watchful, like it's waiting for something. The garden is still, no birds, no insects, just dew clinging to rosemary like tiny lanterns. You breathe deep and set out on your final morning of tending. Lys is gone, Io is gone. Clea is teaching somewhere in Anatolia. You'd say none of them ever left. But dawns like this make you question which stories belong to people and which belong to time. You cup your hands around the tea you brewed and cross the garden, pausing to brush your fingers over the basil, still vibrant despite winter's doubts. You trace the spiral symbol carved into the bench, feel the groove your fingers once followed when you didn't know what faith looked like without kneeling. Somewhere in all of this repetition, planting, waiting, watering, leaving, you realize time's not linear here. It's circular. Like the hoof prints in snow that vanished before sunrise. Like the garden that sleeps in winter but blooms in spring. Like Io's shape-shifting myth that never asked to end, just to continue. You reach the cairn. The pendant rests at the top, tarnished to a silent gleam. The flat stone with the words still underneath, the spiral. The flower shaped like an ear blooming at the base. You kneel, fold your hands around the pendant, and speak aloud, because no one's listening but the wind, and that might be enough. We kept walking, you say, voice low. It never asked more than presence. You place your forehead against the cool stone and feel the weight of stories carried in bones and leaves and roots tangled deep in the soil. You whisper Io's name once, soft as a prayer or a lullaby. It doesn't echo, how could it? But you sense it settle. Behind you, the garden stirs. A breeze carries time's sharp sweetness, moves a single leaf across the old book cover on your lap. The wind chime in the basil bed jingles, small and deliberate, though no one is near it. You sit upright and smile, not because peace is perfect, but because peace is messy and relational and slow. You slide the pendant into your pocket and stand, fingers brushing stone, wood, herb. You walk through the garden one last time before morning light fully releases the world, each path familiar, each patch humming its own memory. You reach the gate and pause. The world stretches beyond it, lands, stories, quiet expectation. You lift your stick and tap it thrice on the stone threshold. An old ritual you made up. You turn back. The garden looks back. Keep breathing, you tell it. Then you walk away, not as someone escaping or finishing, but as someone carrying. Air cools gently now, folding around you like a wool blanket softened by time. The sky fades from soft indigo to that dusky silver where light doesn't really disappear, it just loosens its grip. The garden behind you hums in its sleep, each leaf curling into itself like a memory that no longer needs attention. You walk, slowly, steps deliberate, not because there's urgency, but because the moment deserves length. Your breath syncs with the silence around you, long and unhurried. There's no need to name this place anymore. It's become a rhythm, a soft repetition that echoes in your ribs. Still, still, still. You think of Io, not the goddess, not the cow, but the person who kept walking when no one applauded. The woman who refused to stay in one story. She is in the time now, and the wind, and the sigh of lake water kissing stone. You think of everyone who came after, who found pieces of themselves in hooves and herbs, and the way grief makes a garden. Of you when you let it root in your chest. Not every story needs an ending. Some just need space to rest. Let your shoulders drop. Unclench your jaw. Close your eyes, or don't. Let your mind wander the garden paths. Step over the spiral-carved stones. Reach out to brush a hand across rosemary branches that smell like memory and shelter. Inhale slow, hold. Exhale slower. It's okay. You're not lost, you're just here. Still, whole in pieces. A body-shaped pause between chapters. Let it be enough. Let it be soft. Let it be sleep. Tomorrow's stories will wait. End of script. Sweet dreams.